I can't say 2022 was a great year for me, and that includes my reading as well. Apart from a couple surprises, which I'm happy to mention on this video, my experience was very average and even forgettable. I'm a firm believer that all circumstances surrounding us influence how we view each story we consume, which means they have definitely affected my reading experience. I'm hoping that 2023 will allow me to have a more thoughtful and meaningful reading journey, with new favorites to uncover and lessons to learn a lot from. The first book I read was actually wonderful and an inspiring start for the year. Rilke's Book of Hours is the perfect companion for a stormy night while you're all curled up in a blanket. It offers comfort, warmth, and company when you most need it, while feeling like this beautiful melody you've heard a long time ago. The hour is striking so close above me, so clear and sharp, that all my senses ring with it. I feel it now. There's a power in me to grasp and give shape to my world. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. All becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet and be met. You, my own deep soul, trust me. I will not betray you. My blood is alive with many voices telling me I am made of longing. Almost immediately after that, I had two more very pleasant surprises, which I would definitely include in my favorite books of this year. The first one being The Nature of Middle-earth, which is this beautiful book edited by Carl F. Hofstadter. This is all about how the enchanting world of Middle-earth was created, was thought about and imagined in Tolkien's head. It offers a lot of information that you wouldn't probably find in other publications or in other works by Tolkien. It is, of course, a bit of a dense book. It feels a little bit like a study guide, but to me it is just fascinating to learn more about the creation of this beautiful place that I now feel like is almost a second home to me. I absolutely fell in love with the world of The Lord of the Rings, and ever since then I just want to lose myself in the works of Tolkien. My wonderful friend Lucy is currently hosting a read-along. She is reading Tolkien's letters, I believe, right now, and she shared a few passages that have made me cry already. I probably relate to Tolkien's self-deprecation a bit too much. His works have started to mean a lot to me, so to read this kind of companion to everything he was thinking about how the characters should look like and the language should sound, all the landscapes, how they were planned and everything, is such a fascinating process. So if you are also a fan and are looking forward to learning more about his incredible creative thought process, I highly recommend you this book. But the biggest surprise was definitely the next book. I was not expecting to love it so much, and that is, of course, The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is the first book of the Gentleman Bastard series, and it is about a group of thieves who do very questionable things, of course, because you would think this would be kind of a Robin Hood almost retelling where they steal from the rich to give to the poor. That's not really what happens. I love this book because of the friendship and mostly found family trope, which is one of my absolute favorites. It warms my heart, but apart from that, I thought Scott Lynch's prose was stunning and very funny. Now, this sense of humor might not work for everyone. It is quite a little grim, I would say, a very dark type of sense of humor, which I just love. I also listened to the audiobook for this one, and I am definitely planning to keep reading the series. I actually own the sequel already, which was a very kind gift, and I'm planning to read it as soon as possible. Something else that surprised me about this book was that it made me laugh so much from everything that was happening. It seemed absolutely insane, all the scenarios that they created in order to fool a few people, but then suddenly there's a bit of a change in the story that just made me feel so many different emotions. This book broke my heart during very specific scenes, and I'm very curious to see how the story continues. A book that I would like to shout out as well, because I feel like it's not getting the attention that it deserves, is We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee. We actually read this one for the Tea Leaves book club, and I hadn't even heard about it until we picked it, so I'm very glad we did, because I think it's a wonderful story, although very hard to take in sometimes, because this follows Japanese American teenagers after the attack of Pearl Harbor. I really enjoyed my experience reading this as well as discussing it with the book club. It's a very short read, not only because the writing style is quite accessible, but also because it has a lot of different formats throughout it. It has a few illustrations and letters and everything, which makes it for a very interactive reading experience in a way, and also makes it easier, I guess, for us to try and put ourselves in these people's shoes. I love how vulnerable this book is. The author did an amazing job showing us the simple, innocent routine of these teenagers just experiencing their personal and professional lives while trying to uncover and figure out their own identity. And also at the same time, there's this terrible war happening that is completely out of their control, but which of course changes the course of their lives immensely. Because of this sensitive topic, I of course would suggest you maybe look at the trigger warnings before reading this book, but at the same time, I highly recommend it because I don't think it's a perspective we usually see a lot from, and the book manages to give a voice to those who at the time probably felt like they didn't have one. So that's mainly why I recommend it, and I would love to hear if you read this one as well, because I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. On the other hand, I finally read a book that had been on my reading plans for a while, especially because a few years ago it was quite popular actually, and it always sounded very interesting to me, and I'm very glad I finally read it, which was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I actually listened to the audiobook for this one, which I highly recommend you to do as well. Because it is a novel in verse, the audiobook sounds like a music, and it's absolutely incredible, the words that Elizabeth Acevedo was able to craft for this story, which is a coming-of-age story. I believe it is considered to be young adult as well, which I don't usually tend to read as much, but this one surprised me again for how vulnerable it was. I felt for the main character so much, and I love how she talked about so many things in such few words. She covered her family struggles and problems she was having at school, but most of all her anxiety when facing all of that. And I will always admire authors who can put so much thought into each sentence, and especially making it sound so beautiful while tackling such incredibly complex topics. It of course covers race, identity, sexuality, abuse as well, discrimination. There's so much to unpack on this tiny little book. The audiobook was so short as well, and I'm very glad I finally listened to it. I definitely want to get a copy for myself eventually. I also read two dark academia books that I really enjoyed, which were Possession by A.S. Byatt and Babel by R.F. Kuang. They were both very pleasant surprises, but you will be able to hear all about my thoughts on a future video. Just know that I really enjoyed them, and I didn't want to talk about my favorites or highlights of the year without mentioning these two books as well. before I tell you my top 2 favorite books of the year, one fiction and one non-fiction, let me tell you about another fiction book and another non-fiction book that I truly loved reading this year. So for fiction, we have, of course, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And this one is interesting because I was not exactly sure what to expect from it. I had seen the TV show adaptation, but I also had heard it was a very loose adaptation. It was very different from the book, and I can confirm now that is absolutely true. This is very different, and I love the book even more than the show. But it's very quiet, it's very slow. The horror is very subtle throughout most of the book. It just feels unsettling. You know something is wrong, but you're not exactly sure what is it that's not exactly working properly or as it should. But what I loved the most about this book wasn't even the horror, because usually I don't even get scared easily. I do love reading about it, but I guess it doesn't have the effect that it is supposed to have on me if I read horror. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're looking for a very scary, terrifying book, this is probably not the best choice. It is much more about the atmosphere and the strange feeling you get while reading it. And it's also a bit funny sometimes. But what I loved dearly about this book and what moved it up on my list of favorites was the exploration of mental health and isolation, how the house represents so much more than you think at first, especially for a particular character whom you could consider to be the protagonist. The way it describes feeling anxious and lonely and completely cut out by everyone else in your life is so realistic and so genuine, so raw, that it even hurt to read sometimes, especially towards the ending, knowing how the story gets resolved and where the characters end up, especially this person. I couldn't think of a sadder ending, but also of a more perfect ending for this story. It's a beautiful and very thoughtful portrayal of mental health, I would say, which I really appreciated and I wasn't really expecting from this book. So it really touched me, and that's why I, of course, wanted to mention it. And my other pick is very, very different. This is a non-fiction all about climate change and how the world is pretty much dying right in front of us and we're not doing enough to save it, and one day it might be too late. Some argue that it is already too late. So it is scary. This is The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warning by David Wallace Wells. This was incredibly well written and well researched, and it scared me. This is what I consider to be a terrifying book. I have a hard time recommending it, but at the same time I must, because I think it's one of those books that everyone should read. This took me a while to finish. It's not exactly one of those books where I want to read a lot of pages in a row, because there's a lot of information here and it is hard to process everything, because it is a lot, as you can imagine. It is overwhelming, but it is a necessity for us, for human race, to read about what we are doing to our home, because the planet is our home and we are not taking care of it. So this is a fantastic book. I highly recommend you to read it and take your time with it. Maybe do some research as well as you read it, which is what I did in a few chapters. Unfortunately, it was overall a very weird reading year for me. I had a lot of disappointments and books that I just really didn't like. I believe the rating that I gave the most this year was 3 stars, which is also the rating that I like giving the least. I don't even care that much about that exactly, but when I was looking at my entire reading year, I was struggling a little bit to give you some recommendations. So I'm really glad that at least I have found these to recommend to you in case you haven't read them, because I thoroughly enjoyed them for many different reasons. But now it's time to highlight what were my absolute favorites, and as always I am not counting rereads because those are books that I have, of course, experienced before. If I included them, then The Tenant of Oldfell Hall by Anne Bronte and The Fellowship of the Ring would have to be here. But excluding those, we are going to talk about 2 incredible books that I still think about every day. And I'm gonna start with the nonfiction, I guess, why not? And that is Finding Me by Viola Davis. This is a memoir, an incredible memoir, and if you get the chance to listen to the audiobook, just do yourself a favor and listen to it, because it's this incredible woman who narrates it. I have been a fan of Viola Davis for a long time now, actually. I have seen her in a few TV shows and movies, and her performance is always so impactful to me. She has such a strong presence on screen. She has done so many different roles that couldn't be farther away from each other, and she nails it every time. So I loved her as an actress already, but listening to her, hearing her speak about her experience ever since she grew up, and this book actually has a lot of focus on that, on her childhood, on her growing up, her family, and how she was treated, how terribly she was treated by so many people for no reason at all, really. I will never understand that. It still happens today, and I don't know how it is still an issue nowadays, but I feel like unfortunately it always will be. That's a tangent. We don't need to go there. I'm not the right person to talk about that. So instead of listening to me, please listen to her and what she has to say. It's a fantastic memoir, and when I when I finished listening to it, I immediately went and grabbed a copy for myself because I really loved it, and because I know that these books usually include pictures and I really wanted to see them. I don't know, I really admire her, and it was amazing to just hear her talk about everything and nothing sometimes. I think my favorite part, which was very wholesome, was how she met her husband and the first interaction that they had. I loved it. It made me feel so happy. So yes, that's this one, Finding Me by Viola Davis, my favorite nonfiction of the year. It's incredible, highly recommended. And my favorite fiction of the year, which I have mentioned a few times now, but I don't know what it is. This book just did something to me, and that was Chocolate by Joanne Harris. I have this thing for quiet, slow books set in a small community where people change each other's lives in the most unexpected ways. That whole combination, it's almost enough for me to immediately love a book. That's exactly what happened. I had seen the movie before and adored it. It is one of my comfort movies. I don't know why I'm so surprised that I ended up adoring the book as well. And it's strange because I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone. I know a few people will probably find it a bit boring and pointless. Because again, it's very slow. It doesn't really have a big plot going on. It's all about the characters and this very closed environment they live in. And there's so much that I love about this book. First of all, we have the social commentary, because this is all about a woman who opens a chocolate boutique in the middle of this small town that is very conservative, especially due to its priest, who considers food, and especially chocolate and anything that has to do with sugar, a sin. And so it is something that's mainly forbidden in this town, but that's a metaphor for something much bigger than that. So there's that whole factor to consider. But then the relationships here and how this woman can do magic through chocolate and what that represents as well. There are a lot of silent emotional moments in this book, and those were the ones that I loved the most. My favorite scene, and trigger warning for domestic violence actually, but it was my favorite scene, was when two women didn't even need to talk about what had just happened. They just understood each other, and no words were needed for them to communicate. It's a beautiful scene, and that's the main reason why I adore this story. It's all about compassion and kindness and being patient, because you never know what's going on in someone else's life. Even if they seem the happiest person in the world to you, that's not necessarily true. There's always something going on in someone's life that you don't know what it is. And all it takes for you to help is that empathy, is to be there for them, even if you don't even speak. A hug is sometimes all a person needs to improve their day, and that's it. Or maybe, of course, a cup of hot chocolate. How it talks about society in a very interesting take, and how the world would be such a better place if we all just took a moment to be there for someone else and not rush them into talking about things they don't want to, or pressure them to be happy all the time, because that's not how life works. I don't know, I just feel like this book has so many layers, and I know people might find it boring, but I find it charming and sweet and magical, because there is a touch of whimsy here as well, you could say. And I really want to read more books by this author. I'm not sure if any of them will ever top this book, but I adored it so much, and it now holds a very special place in my heart. And that's really it. That's my little list of books that I really enjoyed reading this year. I am truly hoping that 2023 will be a better year in a lot of different ways, but when it comes to my reading, I hope I can find some more books to love. I hope I can find more time to dedicate to slow reading, which is my preferred way of reading always. I am a very slow reader. I like to properly intake all the words that I am consuming at the time and really try and grasp the message and meaning of each book that I read. So I hope 2023 offers me maybe more inner peace as well, in order to allow me to have a better mindset, a more calming and relaxed one whenever I'm reading all these books, because I love reading so much. I love stories and I love sharing my passion for them with all of you, of course. So as always, please do let me know if you've read any of these books, what did you think of them, but most of all I would love to hear all about your favorites of 2022. If you cannot pick one, pick 3 or 5 or 10, no matter how many you choose. I would love to know your lists of favorites. I hope you're having the most wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me today for this video, and as always I am sending you all the love, all the hugs, and I will see you again very soon on my next one. Bye everyone!